Viewpoint, the program of personalities, politicians, and perspectives. And boy, I think we might even have all three aboard here today, Mrs. Busby. How are you this morning?
Just swell, thank you. And yourself, please?
About as good as I'm going to get, which isn't maybe about the way it's going to be.
Well, I'm glad you're good now because it's early in the day. Somebody come along and screw it up for you yet.
Well, I might get gooder before the day's over.
Well, you never know. You never know.
Or more gooder, as the case may be.
I think more gooder is appropriate.
Mr. Fraker, we always start the Viewpoint program with try to make a kudo or two for somebody or some bodies, plural, in the community who's done something a little extra or put forth a lot of extra effort. And anyway, Sunday afternoon, Mrs. Busby, Gene and I went to the Harvest of Talents musical.
Oh, I know.
What a nice afternoon that was. Such talent. This First Christian Church, this is an annual thing they call it Harvest of Talents, and it's a fundraiser primarily for world hunger. And it's an ongoing project it's been doing many years now. And a lot of people do a lot of baking, and they do a lot of sewing, they do a lot of quilting and so forth, and it's a big effort, a church-wide effort, community-wide effort, really. And it's always kicked off with the musical program. And it was just outstanding this last Sunday. It was multi-talented group of folks there. And the highlight for the old guy, of course, perhaps, was the medley of songs from My Fair Lady.
Oh, nice.
And with a little background to the story and so forth as a narrator, and it was really anyway, it was a great program, and we were glad to go. Now, I've been asked to comment about the folks down there at Elkhart. You've been down there to the Wild Hare, Mr. Fraker.
I like Elkhart, and I like the Wild Hare.
The folks down there.
I second that.
Yeah. The Elkhart Historical Society. I always have to make that bad slip. It's really a terrible pun. Anyway. Terrible. Really, it's not funny at all. But I don't know.
That actually is true, Bill.
But I appreciate it. Anyway, we're going to have down there November the 9th, Christmas According to Hollywood. And, of course, that will be at the Wild Hare at 5:30 p.m. And, again, the ducats are $25 per person, which is very, very reasonable because the entertainment's good. We even had Mr. Guy Fraker down there one night, and he wowed him. So that's what we're going to do here in just a very few minutes. But they have good entertainment, and, of course, they have an outstanding meal. For reservations, 947-2238. And here it says in this little blurb I got from Jenny Bertoni, the modern history of Christmas has included many sentimental, poignant, and funny movies from Jimmy Stewart to Bing Crosby and Danny Kaye and Christmas Carol, and then, of course, Clark Griswold's National Lampoon. And apparently they're going to have outtakes or snippets of this. I'm not sure what the modus operandi is, but Christmas According to Hollywood, and we're going to be talking about that between now and November the 9th, so think about that. And then again, coming up here real quickly, we had Tony Reistek last week talking about this. Again, the St. John's United Church of Christ Youth Fellowship are putting on a little show, a program for we old geezers who wore the uniform of the country in many various wars throughout the years. And those of us in this generation are kind of slipping away pretty fast. So who knows? This could be my lastest.
Oh, don't talk.
Anyway, I plan to go.
To go? What do you mean you plan to go?
Yeah, you find your terms here.
If I make it between now and November 4th at the Legion. So thanks again to the folks at the young people and their adult advisors at St. John's United Church of Christ. Saturday, November the 4th, Veterans, this is the 11th annual Veterans Dance. All right. Enough of the...
announcements?
Yes, right. Why don't you introduce our nice guest?
I would really like to.
I'm really pleased to have this gentleman with us.
Well, it's always fun to see you because you're so interesting. He's
thank you, Judy.
been involved in the practice of law for
50 years.
Is it 50?
50 years is full.
50 years.
Has it been that long?
Well, needless to say, in 50 years, of law practice, you've seen some very interesting things. It was fun to visit before the program this morning. And he's a prolific writer as well. He's a real Lincoln...
Not only that, but he writes a lot.
Besides, he's really a Lincoln lover. I think we all are in this neck of the woods. And his newest book is Lincoln's Ladder to the Presidency, the 8th Judicial Circuit. That's been changed since we're in the 11th now here.
That is true.
Yes.
That is true.
Aren't you proud of her?
I'd like to...
She's worn a pretty face, isn't she?
A compendium of useless information, once again.
Oh, she uses those big words, too. That's impressive.
You have on this card a quote from Jim Edgar, I'm sure who's remembered fondly by most of us in Illinois. He was our governor, of course, from 91 to 99.
They had their head in the sands if they weren't fond of him.
Pardon?
They had their head in the sands if they didn't like him.
Amen. An honest man. This is a quote from Jim Edgar. Guy Fraker's superb book about Abraham Lincoln and the Illinois 8th Judicial Circuit provides an effective lesson on the importance of political networking. For more than 20 years, Mr. Lincoln rode the circuit with other lawyers and judges. These were smart, influential, and ambitious men. Lincoln made them his friends, and in time they would help Mr. Lincoln climb the ladder to the presidency. Fraker's book is great history, but it's also an excellent primer for aspiring politicians.
Wow, how about that?
That's well written, Jim, but I wish you'd have made the print bigger because I don't see it very well.
You know, I hadn't realized that he had ridden this circuit for 20 years. Somehow I had in my mind that it was a shorter period of time.
No, actually, it's 21, actually, but...
And see, it was a longer period of time, really. Isn't
Right.
that interesting? Well, yes, I think that aspiring politicians could learn a lot from the life of Lincoln. And
Very
as
much
we're
so.
involved in yet another political race, many of them actually, is the November 6th, which is coming very quickly.
Well, I'd like to ask Mr. Guy Fraker, University of Illinois graduate, Brother Sayu, been very, very prominent member of the Bar Association of McLean County down through these years. How is it, Guy, that you have, or when did this interest in Abraham Lincoln first begin to form it in your mind? It's something that you wanted to do and research and get more interested in.
Well, there's really two aspects to that. The first is my interest in Lincoln, and I love to be asked that because I love to talk about my great Aunt Lola, who was the twin sister of my grandmother, and in 1948 she took me to New Salem, and that lit the fire. Then I've been a Lincoln buff ever since, but more intensely since I got the idea for this book in 2001. I had it for a while, but I met with Michael Burlingame, who is the top Lincoln scholar in the country,
Know the name.
to ask him two things. One, is there no book on the subject? And frankly, I knew there was none, but I wanted him to tell me that. And secondly, I asked him if it was silly for me to try to write a book, being a lawyer, not a writer, not a historian. And he said, well, you were a trial lawyer all those years. Trial lawyers tell a lot of stories, so you should be able to do that.
Oh, did he say that?
Yeah, he did. And so with his encouragement, I went forward. And he's, of course, written my foreword, which is a great honor to have his name on my book, because he is the top guy. So that's sort of a long answer. I've been at this since 2001. We met shortly after, I remember the date because he came on the train because it was right after 9/11. So that's how long it's been. It took me, well, it's 11 years ago when I started.
Guy, when you were in law school, did you have a career set out in mind to be a trial lawyer, or at the time you were going through law, you just aspired to be a lawyer, and then it evolved and you got into trial practice?
Yeah, I wanted to be. My goal was to be a small town lawyer. By that I mean like Bloomington or downstate lawyer, let's say.
Do you think that stemmed at all from your interest in Lincoln starting out as a small town lawyer?
I wouldn't be surprised. You know, who knows? I grew up in New York, and my parents were from Central Illinois. My mom raised me. She loved being from Central Illinois. She raised me kind of to come back, and they were from the circuit. My dad was from Shelbyville, and my uncle was a lawyer in Champaign, a wonderful, wonderful lawyer for many years, and that all combines. But I'm sure the fact that Lincoln was a Central Illinois lawyer was a factor in my decision.
Well, I want you to know, Mrs. Busby, I want you to look what a good-looking young dude that was when he was in law school.
Yeah, I certainly would have probably had a terrible crush on you.
Oh, darn, now you tell
handsome
me.
fellow.
Well, 30 years too soon, as they old. Do you remember that? No, you're too young. There used to be a cartoon section way back, and it always says, born 30 years too soon. And it always had some relevancy to each time it appeared to some episode. But he was a pretty good-looking young fella.
We're having our 50th reunion homecoming at Illinois this year, which is going to be quite a good time.
Oh, yes.
See a
what
lot of
happened
guys
to the
I
rest of
haven't
them.
seen. Yeah. Hope the years were better to most of them than they were to me, though.
Oh, I don't know. I think the years have served you pretty well. And goodness knows you can't say you've had a dull life.
No, that's true.
Not one bit.
Life is good. And my decision to come to Central Illinois is certainly the best one I ever made. I love Central Illinois.
Well, it's interesting. Your roots are in White Plain.
That's where I grew up, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And but you decided to drop your anchor here in the flatlands of Illinois.
I did, and I never regretted that. I love, and that's part of the mission of my book. Actually, this sounds kind of corny, but the book tells us the story of Central Illinois as the cradle, and ultimately the place from which he rose, of the greatest president our nation ever saw. And we never get the credit for that. And I think it's because the historians don't come to Central Illinois. And so this story has never been told. And it's important that people know that the 8th Judicial Circuit was truly what shaped Lincoln. And I go so far as to think that he would not have been president had he come from any place but Central Illinois at that time.
You know, this card to which I referred a little bit ago shows the circuit, right?
Yes, that's the dust jacket of the book.
And he didn't just hop in his Cadillac and go to the next town, you know. That was a heck of a route for a fellow to take.
Yeah, and very few of the lawyers did the whole circuit. There was one judge, David Davis of Bloomington, and one state's attorney, David Campbell from Springfield, and they had to go
for the whole circuit?
For the whole circuit, which at its largest was 14 counties. And Lincoln was one of the few, if not the only lawyer who did the whole circuit. And it was 400 to 500 miles, depending on the route, because the roads were so vague that it would vary depending. Sometimes you'd have to go around a slough or something, where in the fall it would be dry. And so it was 400 to 500 miles, around 10,000 square miles, twice the size of Connecticut.
And think of that.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Just the sheer numbers of that, that's a prodigious amount of territory for an individual or individuals to cover.
Right, absolutely. And the lawyers, they do this twice a year, and it was about 11 weeks around. So you think about it, Lincoln was, we always think of Springfield as his home, and it was, of course, and it was his primary base of operations. Being in the state capitol was vital to him, and it was part of the circuit. But the trip around the circuit, he was gone from home about almost half the year.
Well, he was really at the edge of the circuit.
Correct, that's correct.
So wherever he was going to go, he had a long way to go.
That's right, that is true. They went all the way, they went north to Tazewell County, then Woodford County, then down to Bloomington, then down here to Logan County, which had 3 county seats, by the way, during the Lincoln era. Then to Clinton, Monticello, and so forth, Urbana, Danville, down to Paris, skip Charleston. Coles County was never in. Skip Charleston over to Shelbyville, up to Sullivan, up to Decatur, then back down to Taylorville, and then home. So it was quite a trip.
On a horse.
Think of the mode of transportation at that time.
It was, yeah.
Boy, I tell you, you ought to feel like one of the dead-end kids by the time you get any place after all day.
He was, because of this rough upbringing he had, and that's all true about his being a pioneer and a rough-hewn farmhand when he got here. He was physically extremely strong, and he was able to handle the rigors of the circuit because he was a great horseman. You can think about that. That's 400 or 500 miles of riding a horse through prairie. And so he physically was able to take it, and the inns were terrible. The food was awful. Once he had a cup of of whatever it was, and he said to the waitress, "If that's coffee, bring me some more coffee. If it's tea, bring me some more tea."
Mystery meals.
Yeah, that's right.
Is that briefcase you put in here this morning, is that the one he used?
It looks like it, doesn't it? I want you to come to my visitation, Gossett, because that's going to be on my chest. I never...
Well, I looked at that and I said, well, that's probably a pretty typical guy, you know. He's not go out and spend an extra $24 if he doesn't need one. That briefcase has done him well down through the years.
I know, you're making fun. It's a Coach. And I sent it back to Coach because they're guaranteed for life. This is a true story.
Yeah.
And they sent it back. They said, "This is beyond life. We won't fix it."
Oh, God. Like the dentist told my dad, he promised him he'd have his teeth for his whole life, and my dad made him recall that. And the dentist said, "Yeah, but you live too long. Maybe that's what happened to your..."
Guy, as you compiled notes and began to arrange your notes for your book and so forth, sure, it's more than one thing. Can you tell us about some of the things that really stood out that made an impression on you as you began to gather this book together?
Yeah, I can. Number one, I started with this thesis that he was shaped by the Eighth Circuit. Mm-hmm. But it turns out, as I researched, well, I'll be darned, it's true. Uh-huh. All the vital meetings of his career were in the Eighth Circuit. Mm-hmm. The most important people in his life were not in Springfield, in the main, but they were out on the circuit. And one of them, you had, for example, Samuel Parks from Logan County, who was a Vermont native that ended up here, first practicing law in Mount Pulaski, and then moving to Lincoln when the county seat moved. And Parks was one of that team of guys that went to Chicago and got him the nomination. So he had these very talented lawyers and really ambitious guys that were his foils. The other thing people don't know about Central Illinois, and this was a surprise to me, Central Illinois was much more important. We live in the shadow of Chicago now, so we see ourselves as kind of not a backwater, but we're, of course, not Chicago. So, you know.
One of the outer suburbs.
Yeah, that's right, outer suburbs. Well, in those days, the population was much greater in the circuit than it was in Cook County, because settlement of the state came from the south. And, for example, in 1840, the population of Cook County was 10,000. The population of the circuit was 60,000. And the numbers stay, that gap narrows some, but not much. In 1850, still circuit was much stronger, much larger, and therefore all the when you think of voting and redistricting and so forth, there was a heavier population. The state wasn't ruled by Cook County, it was ruled by Central Illinois. So he wasn't this guy from the sticks like we like to think. This was the place, the most important part of the state, and the state was in 1860 one of the 4 key states to the election. So coming from Central Illinois actually is what made him president, I contend. It got him the nomination. Now the general election was another matter, but because the Democrats had split in 1860, the Southern Democrats had a candidate, and the Northern Democrats had a candidate, which was Douglas, of course, Stephen A. Douglas. That made the election pretty much, the nomination was pretty much the victory to win the election. So it's not a real stretch to say that Central Illinois and his being here in the circuit made him president.
You know, the size of the circuit didn't hurt him either, because he had an opportunity to meet influential people in a goodly part of Illinois.
That's a great point. And that's another thing I found that I think is pretty much overlooked is the tremendous networking ability of Lincoln. He was very calculating, and I don't mean that as a negative. But you look as he went to each town, his clients were the most important people in each of these towns, even though they had their own lawyers. And he also associated himself with the best lawyers in each of these towns. And in a number of the towns, I think it's as many as 6 of the counties, he was a lawyer going to that town before they had a resident lawyer. So he really was like a citizen of all these towns.
Yeah, that's kind of an intriguing thing, going days before Google, how the various citizens in the various communities knew about Abraham Lincoln. and his law acumen. And it's interesting that he didn't have formal legal training per se, as we think of. You went to University of Illinois Law School, Georgetown or whatever. They call that, is reading the law? Is that the appropriate?
That's correct. Yeah. And there's a good example of his networking ability. If you look at his partnerships, he had 3 partnerships, and every one of them was different. Each partner was different, and they served his need at the time. His first partner was John Todd Stewart from Springfield, who was the leading Whig, and that was the party before the Republicans, in the legislature. Lincoln met him in the legislature, and Stewart took him under his wing and invited him to come to and become a lawyer, and he studied under Stewart. And so now Lincoln's his partner. Stewart was the most popular, not the best lawyer, because he wasn't too bothered by law. He liked politics better. But he was the guy to know at that time, because Lincoln wanted to get to know people. So he went out under Stewart's shadow, and that allowed him to know everybody and have an immediate client base. That lasted maybe 3 years. He realized he wasn't going to get to be a better lawyer under Stewart, so he dropped that partnership and went with Stephen T. Logan, who was the best lawyer, everybody says, on the circuit. And so Lincoln, and he was a demanding man, not a warm person, but a stern teacher, and he and Lincoln dominated the circuit because Logan was such a good lawyer. So now he learns to be a really good lawyer from him, but he's tired of being second fiddle to Logan. So that partnership breaks up, and then he goes with Herndon, who was more than a bagman. There's a tendency to underestimate Herndon, that he was just the guy sort of cleaning up after Lincoln. Yeah. He was a very fine lawyer. But he was humble man, and he learned to live in the shadow of Lincoln and allow Lincoln the latitude to do his thing. And not everybody could have been a partner of Lincoln's, because if they had their own agenda and their own ambition, it wouldn't have worked. But Seward was more than happy, worshipped Lincoln, and was more than happy to take a back seat to him, even though he was a great lawyer himself.
Can you draw any comparisons between Lincoln's campaigning and what his life that led up to the campaign, and campaigns today, as far as, like, for instance, the networking?
Oh, yeah, I think, as a matter of fact, it occurred to me, and I'm not saying that Obama's a Lincoln. Don't misunderstand that. I'm not saying one way or the other. I don't want to go there.
You have to be careful about your language in the studio.
Don't you have a dog in this fight?
Use a 10-second buzzer on you.
But it was obvious to me when Obama ran for president that he's one guy that had studied Lincoln's career and to understand how to get himself out there. When you look at his fast rise from nowhere to become President of the United States, and if you'll recall, he announced his candidacy from the steps of the old state capitol building, where Lincoln was in the legislature. And I think Obama, his mentor from afar was Abraham Lincoln. I really believe that. So you can learn a lot from Lincoln and watching him and the way he operated. He knew he had no enemies, and Leonard Swett, this wonderful lawyer from Bloomington, one of my favorites on the circuit, just a good guy who had nothing, speaking of a dog in the fight, he had no dog in the fight except to support his friend Lincoln. And Swett said he was a very poor hater, and there's a great lesson for all of us in that. He would have people do him, and you'd think he'd be out to get him. And instead, he never carried a grudge, and before you knew it, these guys were working for him and serving him, and unbeknownst to them, kind of. It's pretty amazing. But if you want to learn one thing from Lincoln, it's just don't carry a grudge. It does nobody any good.
Well, hating is like taking poison and hoping the other guy dies. It really just doesn't serve you well.
No, that's that's well said, and he knew that, and so it's a pretty neat thing that we can learn from him.
Oh gosh, yes.
Today's folks would do well to remember that, but we will not go there this morning.
No, it's true. It's absolutely true.
Viewpoint, fair and unbalanced program here. This is the Fox News of Logan County.
Not.
but
that's going to make me have a draw on my cup of coffee.
Admittedly so. It's interesting, and this is the fun of the internet and so forth. You research, for instance, Lincoln quotes, and there are a plethora of them. And it's interesting, and many of them just cut right down to the chase. They are so on target.
Right.
And we're going to use one to close later on. But I came up with a whole bunch of Lincoln quotes, which is some of which I'd known about, and many others I did not. But did you find in your research anything unusual in his use of quotations or so forth as he went about the circuit practice?
It's popular to think he wasn't a religious man, and his faith journey is pretty remarkable. He started as an infidel, as they called him in those days. He was a non-believer, and that's pretty clear. Everybody in New Salem gives the same consistent testimony, but that's like a college sophomore kind of, And by the time of his assassination, and you read that second inaugural, and his faith in God and his trust in God is pretty remarkable. And I don't know that there's any president that's ever displayed faith in God like Lincoln. And his quotes show that. He quoted the Bible like 76 times in his career. And it's pretty remarkable. Nobody's ever used the Bible like that. But when I say used it, I don't mean that in a bad way. That was a source of his morality. It was a source of his study of human nature. So the Bible was very important to Lincoln.
Would that could be more prevalent
absolutely
in today's world?
Yeah, absolutely.
And in this commercial world that we're in, we need to have faith in our sponsors. And if we don't have faith in our sponsors, we might not have programs like this. Go right ahead, Mr. Ash.